Hello and welcome to Westwind, an audio podcast about cancer, technology in medicine, and policy issues. I'm host and medical oncologist Dr. Jack West from the City of Hope Comprehensive Cancer Center in the Los Angeles area. You can find Westwind material at BeaconMedIC, one word.com, at iTunes, or just about anywhere you get podcast content. I would just ask that you show your interest and support by subscribing, commenting, sharing by telling friends and colleagues in person and on social media, and rating it however you feel is appropriate. You can also share your ideas and opinions by emailing us at westwindpodcast@gmail.com. I'm really happy to be here today with Dr. Cathy Eng, who is a professor and co-director of the Gastrointestinal Cancer Research Program at Vanderbilt-Ingram Cancer Center in Nashville, Tennessee. After many years establishing herself as an international leader in GI oncology at MD Anderson Cancer Center. Cathy, congrats on your recent move, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. This is such a pleasure.
Oh, great. So let's start with people, I think, know you from your professional side, and you've been a luminary in this field for a very long time. But let's go back to just growing up. You grew up in Phoenix, right? And can you talk about what that was like, particularly if that was at all kind of challenging, just maybe growing up as a child of an immigrant there?
Sure. My parents came here from China, and my parents had an arranged wedding. They married very young, which is very non-traditional by U.S. standards. They were married, I think, at the age of 16. They had 3 daughters before me. They all grew up in Hong Kong. And then my dad came here to the United States, as an immigrant family usually does, to improve the possibilities for their children. And he came here with my grandfather to start a business, and I was born here in the United States. So my father and my grandfather opened up a grocery store in a part of town in Phoenix, Arizona that was not well established, you would say. It was largely a Hispanic neighborhood where there were a lot of indigent folks. And basically, my dad worked 7 days a week, rarely took vacation, like once every 5 years. He and my grandfather were able to be relatively successful with this grocery store. And then, very typical immigrant story for a Chinese family, he then just decided to embark upon opening up a Chinese restaurant. So he and my mom opened up a Chinese restaurant. Once again, rarely took vacations, maybe once every 5 years, worked 7 days a week, 2 businesses. And basically, I came along, and I was the only one born here in the U.S. and actually am the only physician in my family.
That's it's really remarkable.
My dad never went beyond high school. My mother actually was illiterate in English. She memorized everything by sight, which I didn't realize until I got older. They worked so hard, and once again, really for a better life for their children. And all my sisters went to college in San Francisco. So we all went to college. They went to the West Coast. I was the only one that went to the East Coast, and we were very fortunate. They were all very motivated, and I ended up at NYU on full scholarship.
That's terrific. Can you tell me, how did your parents settle on Phoenix? Was there some connection that led them there over other choices?
I honestly have no idea. I've often asked that. My grandfather chose that by chance, and he was a little bit of a visionary, and I think he realized that that was an area that needed further development, and it had a lot of promise, keeping in mind when I grew up. So once we left this indigent neighborhood, we went to a middle-class neighborhood by the time I was 4. And I guess I forgot to mention, I was the only Asian kid, relatively the only Asian kid, I think maybe 1 out of 3 in the whole school district. So that was quite interesting, but it made it a good experience and really opened up my eyes as well.
Well, tell me more about that. I would imagine that really shaped your childhood, being, I would imagine, somewhat of an outsider, that it might not have been as welcoming, particularly as a younger child, as it is now, where there are Asians, and it's a very diverse population throughout medicine, if not the entire country.
You are completely correct. Growing up, it was a little bit challenging, I would have to say, because they weren't used to seeing an Asian family. And granted, my mom also raised us Buddhist because that was their religion, how they were raised. But my mother and father were amazing, even though they were so busy. My mom really trusted my care with my best friends in the neighborhood, and their moms became my moms. So I had like 4 or 5 moms growing up while my parents were working 2 different jobs. And so I learned a lot about other religions because obviously Buddhism was not a big thing in those days. And also my mom was amazing. Come Thanksgiving and Christmas, we had a very American holiday. We had Christmas tree up, even though my mom never went to church. We had the full ham, turkey, the whole shebang with an all-American meal, and it was pretty amazing. And as I got older, obviously I became more accepted to everyone, and everyone got to know me. But when you're a little kid, it was a bit challenging.
But how much do you identify with your Chinese background versus growing up in the U.S.? And does it differ a lot between you and your older sisters? Because I would imagine that they may have internalized more of the culture than you did.
Well, you would think that would be the case, but ironically, that is not the case. My 2 oldest sisters they've become Christian, and my third sister still remains Buddhist, and I myself have some aspects of Buddhism just because that's the way I was raised by my mom, but also because I had a lot of exposure growing up in Phoenix. When I went off to college, I actually looked at multiple different religions, Catholicism, Presbyterian, Episcopal, etc., to see which church I felt that I most identified with. But I still believe that I still have a little bit of both. So I'm a Christian, but also I do have some Buddhist beliefs and some aspects in my house because it reminds me of the way I grew up and reminds me of my mother, who unfortunately has passed away.
I'm sorry to hear that. Do you have family still in Phoenix?
Oh, yes. Almost all of the family is. I'm always the one outsider. But yes, most of my family still resides in Phoenix.
So you mentioned that your parents did not have the education, anything like what you had the opportunity for. Did you grow up with a clear expectation of what you should do, either just in general education or any sense that medicine was a particularly noble profession, or was that entirely something that you found your way into?
So in all fairness, I wanted to become a lawyer, but I guess that's not a good thing if you're Chinese because they want you to be a lawyer or a doctor. But I used to want to become a lawyer and did an internship, what we called an internship for senior year in high school for those that were the top, I think, 5 or 10% of their class. And I didn't enjoy law as much at the end of the day, even though I did a little bit of an internship. And then the only opening left was medicine because a lot of my classmates were opposed to blood. And I went to go work with a physician in the Phoenix region and kind of coattailed with him for 3 months, and I loved it. And so my parents, of course, were ecstatic either way.
Oh, that's great. And then you went to the East, to NYU, and then to Hahnemann.
Hahnemann, which unfortunately is closing in the next month. So
that's unfortunate, but obviously you were able to get your education there. How did you end up focusing on cancer? Was that something that you knew relatively early on, or did you come to that later in your education?
I was going to actually become an interventional radiologist. That was my goal originally. I loved surgery, and I did very well in surgery, but the surgeons at that time were telling me that interventional radiology was the new field and it was up and coming, and I was able to match for radiology. But it was very funny during my rotation in oncology, your 4th year in medical school. I remember he was telling me, one of the attendings, he said, "You should go into oncology." And I said, "Oh, no. I'm already all set." And he always reminded me, "You should go into oncology." And I still remember my very first patient that I ever met on the floors. And then what was so funny is once I did radiology for the first year, I was very bored. Not to say that radiology is boring, it's just I was bored. Because at that time, you were required to do 3 years of DI before you could go into interventional radiology, versus 1 year now that's required before you can do IR. And then when I went back to my internal medicine residency after I dropped out of radiology, during my rotation once again in Chicago, it was another person once again told me, "Oh, you should go into oncology. This is really what you should do." So I figured with 2 people telling you while you're rotating, I think that was a sign.
So you did your internship and residency at the University of Chicago?
I did my internship and residency at Rush Presbyterian and my fellowship at University of Chicago.
I see. Okay. So where was it that you developed your focus on GI oncology within that field?
So I wish I could tell you everything was very straightforward for my life, but it was not the case. I actually was a head and neck fellow, and I had a wonderful time with great mentorship from Everett Vokes at University of Chicago, who is a world-renowned head and neck specialist. But I actually was doing GI on the side. They needed a fellow in that area, and I was supposed to stay at University of Chicago for a job in head and neck. But an opportunity arose where they said, oh, well, they're hiring at MD Anderson, and they're looking for GI specialists, and you might just want to go look before you make your final decision to stay on in Chicago. And I love Chicago, and I thought there was no way that I would want to move out of Chicago. But once again, I think it's important when you're so young to look at all your opportunities. And I went to MD Anderson for my job interview, and I remember thinking, I think I might just take this job and stay here. And that's how it ended up. And at that time, it was the exact time that there were other drugs coming out, such as oxaliplatin, for the treatment of colorectal cancer, etc. So it was a good opportunity.
That's really something. What was it like? You've been at MD Anderson for about 15 years or so? And
it would have been 17 this month.
So how was that experience? I haven't spent any extended time there, but I would imagine it's really quite a unique place where you could be one of such a large group of people with very similar expertise in terms of cultivating your own identity and niche for research and finding a place in a sea of people with similar, but ideally not totally overlapping focus for your research.
You're correct. I mean, it is an extremely large institution. I would say that I was, once again, fortunate at that time because the field of colorectal cancer was just changing. And so I think the timing was just right. And at that time, the GI medical oncology department, which was much smaller, and there weren't that many women in the department. And so I was able to establish myself and had excellent support from Jim Abruzzi, who was my former chairman, and then, of course, Dr. Wang-Ki Hong, who was really just a mentor to me in many aspects. I was very fortunate that he took me under his wing. And then, of course, with time, you get to know individuals such as John Mendelsohn, who was extremely incredible individual. And as you know, they've unfortunately both recently passed.
Yes. So you just recently moved to Vanderbilt. What led to that big shift in your life?
I have to be very honest. So even though Dr. Hong had retired a few years prior to my departure, he and I had always stayed in touch. And I always used to wanted to get his opinion and wanted to run various positions that were offered to me by him because his opinion mattered quite a bit to me. And although he gave me lots of opportunities before he retired, and although I was still doing a lot of those same leadership roles, I remember he told me at some point that it was time to be captain on my ship. And literally, that's what he said verbatim. And then he was supposed to help me make the final decision before coming here. And unfortunately, he suddenly passed. But I think it was really the inspiration because I felt that I had achieved what I wanted to achieve at MD Anderson. And although I was very satisfied in my job and it's an amazing institution, I really felt that I wanted to take it one step further for what I think I could achieve in my role. And coming to Vanderbilt was an immense opportunity. It's a smaller institution, which has many positive aspects as well. So obviously, no institution is perfect. But I think with a smaller institution and in a leadership role, you can help try to develop a different vision. And I think that's really what drew me here. Also, the fact that the chairwoman, Kim Rathmel, is amazing. And our Cancer Center director, Jennifer Pietenpol, is also an amazing inspiration. So two amazing women leaders really are an inspiration to me.
That's terrific and a great opportunity for leadership there. How are you liking Nashville so far?
I love it. I have to be very honest. I absolutely love it. It is just beautiful out here, and there's a lot to do outdoors, and it is just a wonderful place. I think it's very peaceful, and I think it has great quality of life. I shouldn't say that too. I shouldn't be so, boisterous about it because then more and more people will continue to move down here, which is already the case. But it is absolutely lovely.
Well, great music, great food, great medicine. That's something. Now, Are you still running as avidly as you used to?
I still do a race, at least one or two per year, although I have recovered from an injury and was out for about 3.5 months, not due to running, due to kickboxing, believe it or not. But,
Whoa.
but I am still running, and I plan to do another race in January.
Let's go back to the kickboxing, because I didn't know about that, and I wouldn't have put it in the top 5 predictions about you either. So tell me more about how you got into it and what it does for you.
Well, so, I think it's really important to do some type of physical activity, especially when you're under a lot of stress with work and everything else, and just to stay healthy. And so besides running, and I also knew that I was more prone to injury because I've been running so long, I decided to increase other activities. So I started weightlifting, and I also hired a trainer to help me out 2 days a week. And part of the one thing that I really enjoyed about this one trainer is he throws in boxing at the end as well as kicking. So a little bit of kickboxing, and it was a ton of fun, and it's extremely hard. I never realized how hard it was. It's such a great cardio workout. And so I've been doing a little bit of that, and I really enjoy it. But unfortunately, I did it a little too soon after running a half marathon. So I pulled my hamstring, and that's why I was out of commission for about 3 months.
Wow. You are a badass, I gotta say.
It's fun.
That's really cool. So no, I'm just impressed. That's all. Can I ask, one of the topics that is getting more attention is gender bias, gender inequities, and disparate opportunities for leadership. It's hard for me to imagine that you have been held back given the trajectory of your career, but have you felt any sense that there have been headwinds from being a woman or an Asian woman in medicine? Obviously, there are a lot in oncology, but I don't know if you feel that it was harder than it should have been at any point in your career.
I would say that definitely in the field of GI, you could feel there were, at least during the time period that my career was developing, that may be different nowadays because there are more women in the field. While my career was developing, I would definitely say there were more men than women, without a doubt. And it was very obvious. And coming in as a junior person, it can be intimidating. I can definitely see that could be the case, especially if you weren't confident enough, and especially if you're not used to hanging around with several males on a friendly basis. I would say that although nothing specific has happened to me per se, there definitely is evidence of gender bias in the field, without a doubt. And in oncology, I'm sure there are instances, and especially in GI, it's just there's definitely a different field when I was growing up and my career was developing.
So do you feel like it's getting better, or are you specifically trying to inculcate a more welcoming environment for women coming after you into the field?
I have had a lot of junior faculty women that have come up to me and asked me for career advice. And I've done some of the workshops that are offered at ASCO as well in regards to mentorship and all that for young junior faculty members. I basically had a discussion with those that have come up to ask me how's the best way to integrate themselves within a male-dominated field. And, once again, and I'm not saying that it works for everyone, and I'm not saying that my whole life has been easy, because it's not been. But, I think it's really important to network. I think it's really important to feel confident, sit at the table with everyone else, speak up when everybody else speaks, because honestly, you could be at a meeting, and literally I would be at a KOL meeting, and it'll be me and maybe one other woman. But, after a while, honestly, GI is a very friendly group. And so we all know each other, and we're all very much like friends. But, when you're coming in as a junior faculty member and you don't know any of these world-renowned leaders, it can be incredibly intimidating. And especially, when you're asked your opinion about something and you're sitting in this group and, you're a bit shy when you go to the microphone and give your opinion, and you're not sure if you should say something, you're not sure if something doesn't sound appropriate, if something actually sounds stupid. And although we always discourage trying to tell women to don't say, oh, this may sound stupid, because no one should say that when they ask a question, you feel that way. And I hope I've been helpful. I've had some other junior faculty members that I've met years ago when they were fellows or coming out as assistant professors, and they are very well-spoken. They feel that they are making a bigger effort about being more well-spoken, more confident sitting at the table. When they give a lecture, they try to speak at a relatively slow, well-thought-out pace instead of speaking, rapidly and not very carefully. I think that every single woman represents a group of women that really, want to make their mark in the field.
Great. We'll continue our discussion with Dr. Cathy Eng in the next episode. Thanks for listening. The West Wind Podcast is a Beacon Medical Interchange production with sound engineering and distribution by Mark Lindsay of Talking Speaker. We hope you'll be motivated to subscribe, whether at BeaconMedIC.com, through iTunes, or through another podcast service. Please also rate it, and I hope you'll be inclined to tell friends and colleagues in real life and on social media. We're always happy to get your suggestions and other input at westwindpodcast@gmail.com. Talk to you again soon.